As you join us today, we encourage you to reflect on the land that you're on and its history. We're located on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee.
The territory is within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon, One Pen Belt Covenant and is home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We are grateful to work on this land.
The future of film and TV production is in Ontario. We've expanded our studio space. We've built virtual production sets, Canada's largest backlot, and an unparalleled workforce. Our Ontario Green Screen program ensures a more sustainable industry. We are Ontario, and we're ready to roll.
And if it wasn't for Toronto, actually, I would not be here talking to Toronto.
Stories. That is the foundation of what we do as artists, just stories.
More people who look like us and think like us are in positions in which we can hire people who haven't had opportunities before in this industry. That is a cause for optimism.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final day of the Toronto International Film Festival's Industry Conference. My name is Jeff McNaughton. I'm the Senior Director of Industry and Theatrical, as well as Programmer of Prime Time here at TIFF. Just a reminder that you can catch up on all of our sessions that have taken place over the last couple of days on our Digital Cinema Pro platform. I'd also like to thank our lead sponsor, Bell, our major supporters, RBC, L'Oreal Paris, and Visa, as well as our major industry supporters, Telefilm Canada and Ontario Creates. Our media partner for our Perspective strand, which this session is a part of, is Screen International. So big thanks to them as well. I'm honored to introduce our next panel, Filmmakers on Africa's Cinema Industries from Development to Distribution. This session is generously supported by Anne-Marie Canning, and we are joined by 4 storytellers from the African continent to speak about their experiences and challenges of getting their work to the big screen. Leading us through this conversation is TIFF programmer Nataleah Hunter-Young. Nataleah, over to you.
Thank you, Jeff. Hi, everyone. My name is Nataleah Hunter-Young, and I am the International Associate Programmer for Africa, the Middle East, and Black Diaspora at TIFF. I am really excited about the conversation that we're about to have because it's one I wanted to have for a very, very long time. And it's something that I think North American industry audiences haven't been exposed to enough. It's a conversation that happens often in European festival spaces, but again, not enough here in North America. So I'm really excited about the panelists that we have today. And I am excited about the African selections that we have across the program, which hopefully you have already had a chance to experience. Those include Neptune Frost, directed by Saul Williams and Anisia Uzeman, coming from Rwanda, which was the opening night film for our Wavelengths program. We have Lingui, Les Liens Sacrés, The Sacred Bonds by Mohamed Salah Haroun, which is playing in special presentations. Mlungu Wam, directed by Jenna Bass, is playing in Platform, our platform competition section. Vuta Nkavute, Tug of War, directed by Anil Shivji, is playing in our Discovery section. The Gravedigger's Wife, coming out of its premiere in Cannes, directed by Hadar Aiderus Ahmed, and showcases the Horn of Africa unlike you have ever seen it, and that's playing in our Contemporary World Cinema section. And then, of course, Saloum, directed by Jean-Luc Herbulot, who is playing in Midnight Madness. So if you have not yet had a chance to explore them, please do so after this session. But right now I will get into introducing our lovely guests. Lovely, talented guests. I will begin with Babalwa Bartman, who is a social entrepreneur and creative producer who uses storytelling as a medium of healing to affect social change within the African community at large. In 2015, Babalwa registered her production company, Sanusi, while working in the development department at Triggerfish, which started off in animation story development and recently branched into live action. Through Sanusi, she has co-written a short film, Sizohala, a story that highlights the occupation movements in South Africa, and recently co-produced and co-wrote a feature, Mlungu, a psychological horror, which addresses the issues of inequality in South Africa, through the story and experience of a domestic worker and her daughter. Both films were written and co-produced with Jenna Bass, sitting right next to her, whose bio I will read shortly. and Babalwa in animation, she currently has a feature in development as Azania, and runs a 2D animation program with False Bay College graduates, which is geared towards giving them the needed experience and skills advancement to assist in their job market readiness. Jenna Cato Bass grew up in South Africa. Her feature films as director include Love the One You Love and the festival selections High Fantasy and Flatland. She also co-wrote Wanyuri Kayu's Rafiki and is a co-writer on another festival selection playing this year that I mentioned earlier, Tug of War, directed by Anil Shivji. Mlungu is her most recent film. Welcome to you both. Hadar Ayaders Ahmed is a Finnish Somali writer-director born in Mogadishu. He has directed several short films, including The Night Thief, and The Gravedigger's Wife is his feature debut. Welcome, Hadar.
Thank you, Nataleah, for having me.
And Anil Shivji was born in Tanzania. He holds an MFA in film production from York University in Toronto and is a lecturer at the University of Dar es Salaam. His previous credits include shorts Shine, and Samaki. Oh man, you say
or Fish of the Lab.
I did this yesterday at the premiere too. And the feature T-Junction, Tug of War is his latest film. Welcome, Emil. I am so excited to have you all here. So I really would just love to start by asking each of you to talk about how you got your films made. So the films that are in TIFF right now, how did you get those made? Oh, maybe I should pick one of you to go first. Emil, let's start with you.
Thanks. Thank you, Nataleah, for having me. And it's wonderful to see friends on this panel as well. I love everyone's film on this panel. Excited to see everyone here. I think with Tug of War or Vuta and Kvute, it was a very weird approach that we took initially. I decided to go do a master's here in Toronto at York University, actually, in order to launch the project. I felt like I was, two birds with one stone kind of story, being able to develop my academic career, but at the same time have find a place that offers the support that I could really use, or the support that's necessary for launching a project, an idea, a concept. Because as many of you can imagine, as my fellow African filmmakers know, we don't have that kind of infrastructure on the continent to get that kind of government support or big financing initially. So when I was at York University, my thesis was a proof of concept of the film, and the idea was to make a short film, do the festival circuit, yada, yada, yada. After 2 years, hopefully things fall in place to make the feature. So I started pitching the story. I was working on it. It was a very weird experience trying to write a Zanzibari story in Toronto. You're writing about the sunshine and the sea, and it's negative 40 degrees outside. So that didn't work. That wasn't working. I found a way to raise a little bit of money through York University to help me just sustain myself while I was developing the project. And I moved back to Zanzibar, and I was lucky enough to work with the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation that supports my career past couple of years, and they love the idea. I mean, as the name suggests, progressive work, work that leans towards socialist ideas of equality and addressing injustice. So when they heard about the story, they were very keen, and we found a way to get some seed funding that really gave me the confidence that I know that we could start the project, but also I got Steven Markovitz on board, who is a force to reckon with really on the continent, globally, in terms of cinema. So that's where the journey began.
Maybe Babalwa and Jenna, do you want to talk about how you got Muluguwam made?
Sure. Okay, I'm being tapped. So we generally aim to make low budget films because we want to make films that are sustainable and achievable for us, but then also for other filmmakers, like to kind of explore models that are actually possible for other filmmakers in South Africa to draw from. So we also know that I don't think either of us are very interested in waiting 10 years to raise finance. It's something I've done before and I hope to not do again. So we prefer to work on lower budgets in order to make more films, basically. So this was always going to be a low budget film. And like everything, it just started with us going, okay, cool, we're going to make this. This is a story we care about. We will put in our own money, we'll put in our own time, and let's see who else we can kind of interest in the story and believe in what we want to do. And the first people who came on board was Causeway Films in Australia, the producers of The Babadook and The Nightingale, who I was fortunate enough to know from meeting at a festival about a decade prior to that. So it was like a very long-standing relationship, and they're quite hesitant about, going into new relationships with new producers and new kind of production companies because, there's, things can go very wrong, and you can have partnerships with people who don't really have the same vision as you. And in this case, it was like really a relationship that was forged on trust over quite a long time, and they were, we really trusted them to really support and nurture the film. And then through that, kind of secured some private finance from a few different places, from the US and the UK, especially from Selmira Productions in the US, who are a major financier on the film and really believed in us and really let us kind of pursue what we wanted to do. So it's a privately financed film, and it made it possible to make it when we wanted to make it and how we wanted to make it. And we're just very grateful for but finding those partners bit by bit who believed in the story and believed that we could also do it under such limited circumstances as well. So
And Hadar, I'll throw to you next. I know in our Q&A you talked about the traveling with the Finnish crew to Djibouti and what that experience was like. Do you want to talk about how you got your film made?
For me, it all started with Cinefilm Vision residence, which is a Cannes Film Festival residence. And this, I think I had a different route to filmmaking than Amil, Bawalba, and Jenna, because this is a Finnish production. This is a European production. And we have a public funding. And so it was easier than most African films. But on the other hand, all African-related films that are European productions, they have exactly the same route that they go through, the same funding places that they go. Like if this was a Finnish production, we could do it in 2 years or in less than a year with all the money coming from Finland. But because this was an international film, a co-production between Finland, Germany, and France, it took us longer, much longer than we expected to actually get the money, because we had financiers walking out of the film simply because this was an African film. And we also had, other financiers walk out of the film simply because this is not African enough, So the process was really long and frustrating, I can say. But I think in a way it was much easier than local African productions. Yeah.
Hadar, do you want to repeat what you just said? We just missed the last few words.
Yeah, and I mean, the funding process wasn't easy, but I think it was much. It wasn't easy and it was frustrating, but I think it was also easier compared to local African productionists, that don't either have money or do it with their own money.
Mm-hmm. Whether the government, which is kind of an ongoing issue.
Yes.
I mean, and a result of colonization and a result of continued underdevelopment of cinema industries, contemporary cinema industries by the West, right? And who is, flooding Africa with American films in the cinemas that remain, which aren't necessarily helping to build cinema audiences there in the countries that we're speaking about. You brought up some really excellent points that I think are often, are probably things both Emil and Jenna have experienced in earlier films of having to really navigate European financiers and development programs in order to get their films made. So I wonder if we can keep talking about that. Let's talk about those festival development programs, which are so key in helping you folks find each other, right? And find community and understand and creative community together. But it is also really important in developing the work. But as I've heard, right, they also sometimes can contribute to creative control and interference in the creator's autonomy over the story, which sometimes comes with these American or European expectations about what an authentic African story is. Can we talk somewhat about that? Babalwa and Jenna, maybe you want to start, and we'll go again, Emil and then Hadar.
Gosh, I mean, do you want to go?
Or you can start. It's not necessarily my. I guess
you haven't been burnt as much.
I haven't been burnt as much, honestly. I mean, I'm fairly new in the industry. I've been doing this for the past 5 years, and it's still a major learning experience for me. But that was one thing that I kind of picked up on immediately. And for me, it was not an option. So immediately I had to, and maybe because I don't have the formal, training, and I haven't been in the industry for that long, it became immediate that what other possible way is there to work, So what was clear was I need to find people that are looking for different options. And where do I place myself within South Africa to be able to find those people? So I probably served time in the industry for 1.5 years, which I felt was enough time to learn about how the system works and to immediately see that it's not going to work for the kind of storytelling that I want to do. Ownership of IP is incredibly important to me, and I guess any other artist. So to be able to preserve that, how else can I work? What else can I do? And I guess maybe we were fortunate enough to meet through a program and share the same values and be able to immediately start thinking of ways. Jenna was already on the path as well, but to immediately start thinking of ways of how we can work in alternative ways, looking at what can be done. How can we create beautiful quality work with what we have, with the resources we have, and with the budgets that we have? And that has basically been the journey. But you can elaborate on being burnt a bit more.
I think maybe it also helped, like when we met, like I was already like up to here, with a lot of things. I mean, I think it's something that I'm sure the others will also speak to. Like each film I've made has been
there have been constant battles in terms of perception of what an African film should be and what gatekeepers allow of African, of African cinema to be shared with the rest of the world and then back to Africa. And yeah, it's tremendously frustrating. And I feel like I've been doing it for long enough when I first made a film, it was a film which was considered, not African enough because I don't know, maybe it didn't have enough animals in it or something. I don't know. And then getting into the era of, okay, cool, African films can be about actual people and not animals now. But now they need to be with a message of this is what we must do to fix the country, or and if anything is, more complex than that or asking harder questions, it's confused or muddled or, I guess that's the kind of space we're in now. And I wouldn't say it's so much like I've had issues with institutions. I think it's, it's the gatekeepers or individuals in those institutions who just by virtue of having a position of power assume that they know best and are not willing to allow for anything else that might, be different, or the fact that you as a filmmaker who's actually working on the continent might have a good idea of what things are like, So yeah, at risk of going on a lot, let me stop there and allow the others to speak, because I'm sure you've had many similar experiences, all different ones.
Yeah, I will move to Emil next, but I also want to bring up something that Emil said yesterday in his Q&A around the fact that filmmaking on the continent is never a director first kind of activity. The objective is the creation of an ecosystem that remains and can continue to produce work. Emil, do you want to take the helm?
Thanks. In addition to what Jenna and Babawa have mentioned as well, the two things, the Vutane Guvute is the first film I've made that has actually tapped into grants. And we've got the grants from the Berlinale Cinema Fund, World Cinema Fund to Vision Sud-Est, etc. My previous works, I've never got an international grant. I've applied, but we haven't got them. And that's perfectly fine, but I don't think it should allow you to stop doing what you're doing and the timeline that you want to work with, because we've been able to make those films. And it's forced me to look for financing in different spaces. And we've tapped into local communities in the way you raise money for weddings, where people in Swahili say you do a mchango, your contribution, do the same thing for a little bit amount of money to support catering or small activities. So definitely ways to do it. And I think it is way more sustainable, as Jenna mentioned, for filmmaking on the continent. It's not reliable, but what is these days anymore? Yeah. But it is something that really lets you keep the ownership of the story and share the ownership with the people that you're making the film for. So they're the ones coming to your premiere saying, yeah, I put in $2 for that, and I want to get the front seat. And it's a great feeling, actually, when that happens. So I've had two very different experiences. I've been having that kind of career for very long. And then with Vutane Guvute, it's been a very, very different experience raising the finance. It's been good. I've learned more about the industry globally. I've learned about the things that I continue to not like about the industry. And I've also learned about the bureaucracy that's involved with the grant system, because a lot of times when you're not in it, you think once I get in, then my life will be better. And then you get in and you're like, no, actually, I need to go back to where I was. So it's a bit of it's a seesaw. Yeah. I think it's super important to be able to have control over your work. And I think with the grant system and financing, maybe even corporate sector, commercial, you slowly lose that. And it's never immediate. It's not a big clause in the contract. It's in the fine print, and it's over time. You start losing this and losing that, an element of this, an element of that. By the end of the project, you might not even be the author anymore. So you really have to be conscious about it. You have to understand what you're doing. I don't think we should be pushed into these spaces where, you've been told, here's a great opportunity, you're getting this fund from this institution or this festival, you must apply. There's a lot of pressure you put on an African filmmaker because that becomes the only door to go through now. And that's the mindset that we're thinking about. If I don't go through that door, I'm a failure. I'm not going to be able to make a movie. And I think that's really debilitating, and we have to break out of that.
Thank you. Hadar, do you want to add
Yeah, this was my first feature film, and this was the first time I ever worked in the continent. And this was my actually. I have made several short films, but this was the first publicly funded film. I have done all the other films, with zero budget, with my colleagues and friends. So this whole process was an extremely learning, lesson for me. Like I said earlier, we have had financiers walk out of the film simply because this was an African film, in the sense that it's about underprivileged African family. And we also have had other financiers walk out simply because this is not African enough, because it's not radical. It's not about piracy, it's not about civil war, it's not about human trafficking, it's not about warlords, all the things. Because for too long, the Western countries, are accustomed to seeing Africa through Western filmmakers' perspective, through their lenses. So they are accustomed to seeing Africa in only one way. So for us, or at least for me, I cannot speak for everybody, but for me, it was difficult to make them believe that I can make a love story in Africa. And they're like, yeah, but
Horn of Africa, or in
exactly,
yeah.
How could that
Exactly.
possibly happen when people are
Exactly.
shooting each other?
Exactly. I mean, I love Africa. I have never seen a love story from Africa, unless there's really, unless it's about white savior, or there's other world involved. So trying to convince them to finance a film about love set in Africa was extremely difficult. And the funny thing is that you will never see these same financiers say the same thing about a Swedish film, that it's typical European film, or about a German film that is not European enough. It's only about African films that they have to, define what type of cinema should come from Africa. So it was really, really, a learning process for me, about, the way things work with African films. And like Amil said, you have, as an African film, filmmakers, you have only one door. When for the Europeans, for others, there's like tens of other doors and options that they can go through and ask for money. For us, like, we have to get in line for only one door. And I remember, one financier telling me, oh yeah, we have two films set in Africa and they're both great, but we cannot, support them both. So we have to choose one, and these two might have are quality-wise much better than the 20 other scripts they have on the table, but because they have only one door for the African films, they have to only, so they're making the African, films compete against each other in those sense as well. So it was just really, learning, process for me.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't take long to see it. Obviously, as filmmakers, you're coming directly up against those barriers. But Balwa, to your point, I've only been around for 5 years in this industry as well, and it didn't take long for me to see it either from the curator's side of things. I was several years ago, actually, when I first met Amil, I took a 2-month trip to the continent and attended 4 different festivals in 4 different countries. I was in Zanzibar first, then I spent some time in South Africa at the Durban International Film Festival. I went up to Botswana, and then I went over to Zimbabwe. And in that experience, came back with a wealth of exactly what you're just saying. These experiences over and over again of being denied the experience that you very well know, the story that you very well know, because it comes from you and it comes from where but you have to now convince a Western audience that it is indeed authentic and worthy of being told broader than on the screen in a way, in this broad way. Hadar, you made a really important point around that, the lenses. And I think that also comes down to racial politics as well, where often Americans and Europeans are trying to map their own ideas of what their racial politics are in their space onto the continent of Africa, which then adds this other doubling layer of imperceptibility when it comes to the work that's being brought forward. I wonder, maybe we can talk about co-production treaties a little bit, because that's often an area where I think African countries see possibility. And can we talk about co-productions and the opportunities and challenges that you are all aware of when it comes to navigating co-production treaties between African countries, and often they're former colonial masters. But yeah, let's go there. But Balwa and Jenna, I'll start with you guys again.
So I've only made one film, which was like a co-production, a European co-production, and that I didn't produce myself. So I had less firsthand experience of that, though I kind of felt many of the aftershocks of it in the creative process. We actually, I'm going to get in so much trouble for saying this, but when we were editing the film, we had obviously you have just a placeholder for credits at the beginning. So and we obviously put in all the logos and everything. So for when we were just editing the film, we had a placeholder credit that said, with the support of colonialism. Before the film. So I'm sorry. I'm also very grateful as a white South African for getting this money that's meant to develop this. Okay. All right. I think, so basically I don't really speak to a lot on this subject because it's not so much my direct experience. But the one thing I think that is, I would like to say is that, to do a co-production, you need co-producers. And for African filmmakers who in the first place struggle to even get out of the country, out of the continent, to international to film festivals, to meet people, not just once off, but over a period of time, to forge those relationships in a way, it's really hard to then have a relationship with a co-producer who you really trust, who knows your work, who knows you, who's maybe visited you, so these co-productions are only going to be as good as those relationships. And if it's really difficult to get those relationships, it's going to cause problems later on the line. So in this case with Mulungu, this was, it's not an official co-production, but it's, co-produced with an Australian company. And that kind of sounds really crazy, especially because, Australia's got its own kind of weird racial politics and everything. And, but that could only work because this was really two producers who had taken a real interest in what we were doing over a long period of time. But that is a major asset that we had that I don't know anyone else who has, almost, who has those kinds of relationships. It's really hard to get them. And it's hard being, when you're isolated in a con, you can't even get into the festival to meet those people in the first place. Ooh, you're muted.
Babala, what did you want to add?
I guess with the with the co-productions and just I guess adding on to what Kada had said, a huge part of us doing the stories that we are doing is to obviously erode a lot of a stereotype. It's an essential part of why we want to tell stories. But if we are collaborating or working with individuals that are operating from that point of trying to dictate who we are, then we are left with nothing but charity models, which is why you end up with the case where, we can only pick one. Because even then in the, in that level of needing to finance, African films, which is also not a genre, so then we get stuck in this in having to accept these charity models that are not, once again, not sustainable and don't really work for the creatives or for the growth of the industry. Not really sure how that can change. I guess another thing would be how do we open up platforms and communications for for more possibilities between Africans and Africans in the diaspora, because a lot of the times we're having these conversations, we seem to be stuck in thinking that the only form of financing we can get is from, is from the West, either from Europe or etc. So I think the time is actually now, because there's just so much to benefit on both ends. There's so much, exchange that can happen there. And I think it would make a tremendous impact in the industry.
Absolutely. I don't know if Emil or Hadar, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, Tanzania doesn't have treaties with anyone. I mean, we barely have an industry, which is hurtful for the filmmakers to be able to cross borders. But on the other hand, it allows you more freedom, and you don't have to deal with the bureaucracy when you are able to kind of pave your own path as a filmmaker. The idea is to obviously pave a path for more than just yourself. With Vuta Nikuvute, it was my first time having a co-production with another company, let alone another African company. And this really kept the decision-making within the room. So Stephen and I would get together and decide, and it was everything from the big things to small things, but allowing us to have that power. We decide for the benefit of the film, for the benefit of the ethical issues that we want to address in the film. And we both are people who are very active outside of the film world on the idea of African identity in mainstream media, also just generally in African politics. So we could have political debates between two producers where you're not creating any sense of white guilt, or because when you talk to the European producers, some of them are either the outright racists or the other ones are the indoor racists. They won't tell you about it, but it's there, and you think that you're with them and you think you're fighting the same fight, and then you're not. And that's unfortunately more times than not. More times than how it is. So I think working with a fellow African who's very well aware of the systems, the international ones and the local ones, but being able to really have these very long, development and pre-production, Stephen and I would have these long debates and discussions about money, what kind of the politics that would come with the financing, and not just the international European grants, but even local money. There's this billionaire sitting in Zanzibar who says, I want my name on your film. What does that mean to the politics of the movie? That's something you have to carry on. So I think it's not just these, especially now, it's not just the European financing and the grants. It's also we have to understand what the strings that are attached come with these with this financing. If you look at Tanzania, it's such an underdeveloped industry. It's the NGO sector that has completely defined filmmaking. In the 80s, we had the Tanzania Film Company under Nyerere's socialist regime, and those were government-funded films, and they were progressive and critical of Nyerere. But that's just Mwalimu Nyerere. I mean, one in a million. And then now you have the films for the past 15, 20 years, the ones that are even somewhat of a budget, and I'm talking about $10,000 to $20,000. They have an NGO-driven agenda, and all the strings attached with the NGO, whether it's throw in 3 lines of malaria every 4 minutes, or make sure you have the blue mosquito nets and you have an American script supervisor come in to redact the script. That's actually in your contract. I've seen this. So when that's the kind of filmmaking that's happening, you have young, enthusiastic, talented artists saying, I have a film about rape, so I'm sure I'm going to be able to make it because there's funding for it. And that's the mentality. And you see where the sources are coming from. So the work is not just about, trying to access European money or making it more accessible or opening new doors. Actually, there's a whole mentality question here, about fighting the consciousness that's being built right now with this kind of money and freeing ourselves from it.
I think, everything you're saying, this could be a 3, 4, 5 hour conversation. I mean, it has been with some of you and me already. But I think something that also comes to mind is the language politics that we often see in film, and how we will get an African film that is in a European language because of the co-production requirements, that they be 51% or 60% in, be it in French or in another language that is not necessarily the indigenous language of the place that is at the center of the story. Hadar, I mean, in your case, you have an entire beautiful, stunning film in Somali with a Finnish tag on it. Talk about what that was like, and whether that was a challenge for you in that process?
Yeah. So this was a whole European co-production. It was French, Finnish, and German. So we didn't have any money coming from from Africa. We had some money also coming from the Middle East, but no Africa. So before the script ended up with these 3 productions, it was at some point in another French production, which pushed me to make the film in French, because then I would have a bit of budget with big French names attached to the project, and we would have a wider audience, for the film. And I thought about it, and then I said no messing. So I really wanted to make the film in my own mother tongue for so many reasons, and I was the only person in the entire crew who could understand the language, the entire crew. So that was really, really challenging, and and then we had also sorry, I just went blank. But yeah, so that was really, really challenging. But what was I saying?
You were saying that you were the only person who could understand what your cast was saying.
Yeah. So the language was really very important for me, and luckily I had these 3 production companies, these very supportive, who were really, really supportive of making the film in my mother tongue, because they were like, you just make it, you just go ahead and make it. And I was lucky enough to make it exactly how I intended to make it. And it was challenging in the post-production, because, I had to also subtitle and everything for the editor, and, for everybody to understand. But yeah, I rejected the suggestion of making the film in French, just to make, in Somali language, for the next generations, for the coming generations, also to let them know that it's possible for them to make films in their own mother tongue, and not only follow what's, popular, or, just follow, making films in English language, or in French language, or in, the language of wherever they, are living. So yeah, I hope I made some sense.
Absolutely. I know we have a question in the chat, so I'm gonna go there. But I know in the case of Mluluam, when I first saw it, having experienced only, by visiting the language politics in South Africa, it was quite clear to me how language was being used in the film as a creative tool as well. Like, language was as important to the story as anything else in the film. And at Emil, I know the same goes for you. There are moments in the film that really do hinge on the use of Kiswahili or English. Entire conversations happening where one person is speaking English and the other person is speaking Kiswahili. These things add to the creative element of the film, but often are so heavily, this is such an example of something that can be taken away from the director's power, the screenwriter's power, when it comes to producing these works. Okay, we have some questions in the chat that I will put forward. So what advice would you give to filmmakers new to the film industry? And maybe I can tie it, because we're getting close to time and I do want to talk about distribution. Maybe you can tie in some thoughts around distribution. And when I say distribution, I mean access to international cinema in Africa, as well as in the rest of the world's access to African cinema. So the question again is, what advice would you give? to filmmakers who are newer to the industry? Jenna, your face is killing me. Go ahead.
I'm trying to see that as one question, but
okay,
I'm not.
It's not. It's really not. Yeah, I'm trying to do too much. Can we talk about distribution first, and then we'll come back to advice? What advice would you give? Like, I mean, what? Yeah. Sorry, guys. It's just like distribution is the beast. It's the elephant in the room at every single conversation that, like, when it comes to African film. And yeah, I think, let's just go back to the question in the chat. What advice would you give to filmmakers new to the film industry? Because I think, honestly, distribution is wrapped up in there, but you can really.
It is. Yeah. Want to go?
Advice. Sure. I think it's just there's a lot of work to be done, you know, and it's what I've learned in the little bit of time that I've been around here is that most of the issues that most filmmakers have in the industry are just not intellectual, you know, issues. It's just a lack of common sense in most spaces. So I think coming into this space, do not allow it to intimidate you. There is so much room as far as African storytelling. There's just a lot of room for alternative models. And we need to trust that, because from what I have seen and the impact or result of what has been followed in the past years has hardly had any impact. So it's really about just being daring to explore alternative models. And it might sound like it's easier said than done, but it just requires you to, there are a lot of us that are speaking the same language, and it's just high time that we connect with the people that are doing what we all want to do. And I think that'll have a better impact, you know, as far as just seeing the change that we want to see in the space.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's just going to be so many people who tell you no. Like everyone is going to tell you no, and if you're lucky, someone will tell you yes, but then they'll change their mind and say no. And to just stop looking for someone to say yes and to say yes to yourself, which is also easier said than done. But when people tell you that no one cares about films in, you know, native African languages, and no one's going to watch that, and no one's going to watch a love story in Africa, and no one's going to, you know, like, just don't listen. Just like block it out, because you just have to. It's the only way you get anything done. And the only way you get anything done is if you make a film and make a mistake and then make another film. Because I think that's the other thing, is like African filmmakers are not allowed to make mistakes. It's like, you know, or if they are, it's just like, shame. Like they couldn't get it together, you know. But like, let people make mistakes. Like, let us make mistakes, and let yourself make mistakes. And just keep on going, because that's the only way you build a career. It's not about the one film, it's about your career and about the industry you work in.
Here's a distribution question that just appeared right in time. Has the growth of online streaming platforms impacted you at all as you've tried to distribute your films? Let's talk about that, because my little preamble will be this. I know that there's a move with the streaming companies moving into Africa and beginning to put in the desire to develop African stories. So maybe we can talk about what's happening there. Has the growth of online streaming platforms impacted you at all as you've tried to distribute your films? Anil or Khadar?
Yeah, I think it's been interesting. You know, it's recent, it's exciting. There's the good and the bad. At least I can speak from a personal experience. The good, obviously, is that it's increased this energy on ground about there's this possibility, there's this dream of having to be on a streaming service, and it can happen. It's within arm's reach, and that idea, whether it's true or not, still allows the filmmaker on the continent to put their ear on the ground and start creating new ways and alternative models, as was mentioned, which before seemed just impossible. There was a very defeatist mentality, and I feel like we're starting to get rid of that defeatist mentality considering that there's more platforms available, whether it's on the continent or whether it's in the diaspora or the global scale ones, the big boys. So I think that's what's like one of the good things about it. That's what it's done. But on the negative side is that, at least, and I can speak from a personal experience, is that they're not changing their models of distribution in terms of their contracts, in terms of the power relations. If anything, they're getting worse because they know that you don't have an alternative. So you're cornered as a filmmaker. So finding streaming services or distributors that can really sit down with you, look at you eye to eye, and give you an opportunity to speak and claim your rights, IP or whatever, or the authenticity to the story, and that still hasn't happened yet. And I think it's going to take time. So I think the same struggles we were having with large distributors, whether it's DVD or the theatrical ones, we're having them with the streamers as well, because they're using the similar models in the way they talk to African filmmakers. I mean, some of the numbers that I've heard on these large streaming services, it's tears come to your eyes. It's really bad, you know? So I think we still need to keep the fight and not be blindfolded by the fact that it's easily accessible. I can give an example in Tanzania. Everyone's, we did a press conference before I came here about Tanzania going to Toronto, etc. Very exciting. And everyone's first question, like, okay, so when will you be on Netflix or something like that? And you're like, well, it's not the success model doesn't just mean being on a database, on Netflix.com. There's so much more, I mean, that's great, obviously, accessibility, etc. But there is so much more, and it depends on your audience and what kind of film you're making and who you want to get into. Maybe you don't want to just be a number in a database. But I think there is that sense of education is also required on both sides, in our audiences, but also with the streaming services, that they can't play up the same models they've been using in the theatrical manner with the older distributors.
Mm-hmm. But Balwa, I want to go to you because I know you also work in the animation space, and that can be a concern there. So, what has your experience been with these online streaming platforms in the animation world?
Yeah, I think what we have, so animation, like African animation, has been, at the forefront recently, and I guess as is everything, African. But in particular, once again, the approach, to the creatives is this charity model. We are here to develop, but essentially what is happening is that creativity is being mined, and there's zero development happening. So the recent Netflix slate is, and I'm going to be blunt, white boys reaching out to established, animation, South African white boys, and them being, fronting Black creativity, and no one owns their IP. Terrible contracts, which we've had to decline, in the past, and in declining that, your work does not get made. So it's incredibly frustrating. And I'm not sure how else to deal with it outside of just calling it out. I think if Netflix is going to say that they are developing African animators, then we need to see that development. The needed development is not so much in our ability to tell stories. So the fact that it's focused on the story development is that it gives opportunity to mine, stories from Africans. And what we need in South Africa in particular, and I could confidently say the rest of the continent, is the production capacity is what needs to be focused on. And that is what we need a lot of work in. It's not accessible, training in animation is not accessible. In South Africa alone, I can one or two programs, that offer animation training to youth, and those are the ones that I've partnered with to kind of offer them a bit of skills development, but even that is not enough. So all of these, deals and contracts that are currently happening have not made any impact and are not geared towards development, but are actually just there to take. And that is highly problematic. And once again, and everything that is currently in development is not even scheduled to be produced locally. Everything is going to Europe, So yeah, I think those are the kind of issues that we need to call out. And if people are saying that they want to come and invest, in African talent, then we need to be able to hold them accountable for how they approach us, And in all honesty, it just boils down to nothing more than just undermining our intelligence, which is something that seems to be like a common thread throughout the pipeline, from development right through to distribution, and also undermining our audience and the potential, the potential in monetary value there is with developing the African audience. So I think as far as animation, I could say Disney, Netflix, you guys can do better. And you have, it's a disaster.
This is me dropping my mic. Mic dropped. We have about 4 maybe minutes left. And I just want to open it up. Do you either, Emil, Jenna, Hadar, Babala, do you have final words that you want to say before we wrap this in very important and great discussion?
No, I'm just in awe of, about what Jen mentioned. I mean, it's really insight and information about, those things that I don't experience, as an African filmmaker. It's really, thank you for this. And, but, I would just like to say, to filmmakers, especially to African filmmakers, to just really not let anybody define you what African cinema is or should be like, or what type of cinema you should be making in order to succeed. We are more than all these one-dimensional stereotypical images that we have been presented, about us to the world. So just make movies about your grandmothers, about your crazy cousins, failed marriage, stories about love, about about grief, about anything else. Because if they can make films about dancers, you can make movies about your local shopkeeper, and tell those stories with dignity, with love, with compassion, with all those things that we have all been brought up with. Just that.
Emil, do you have any final words?
Now I just have to, I don't know, you've dropped that mic 2 times. Keep up. No, I think everyone here has made such solid points. And I can't speak to the advice. I mean, I'm always looking for advice. I think talking to each other is where you should source advice from. That would be my advice. Because a lot of times when we look outside, you get to hear amazing stories and hear about experiences, but we have such a different monster of our own on the continent when it comes to the industry, the way of filmmaking. Maybe too romantic about it, but I look back to Third Cinema and the Sambens and the Mambetis and Gaston Kabour and Medhondo, and the films they were making, they were redefining a cinematic language that they could understand and they could share. Why can't we still do that? We can still do that with our own. One of the biggest struggles we have in Tanzania, across the region, is that we don't have Kiswahili words for film grammar. So, I always give this example, a director of photography, we all understand their role and their responsibilities. And then you have a cinematographer, you have a videographer, you have an assistant cameraman, etc. You can have 20 people in that department. But in Kiswahili, we have one word, which is mpiga picha, which is a person who takes the photo, whether you're stills, whether you're video. So that instantly creates a debate about how do you really fully understand your own industry, because you don't have the language for it. So I think that there's things we need to develop on our own, and we don't need to apply for a grant from Berlin or Cologne or from God knows where, in order to develop a language that we can use to develop our own industries, whether it's low budget or high budget. So there's a lot of stepping stones, building blocks that we can do on our own. And I feel like we're empowered to do it, and just talking to each other and finding out how one does it can mean that we can translate it into another person's territory. Yeah.
We are at time. I am so grateful for all of you and your work and your voices and the work that you continue to do in your homes to do exactly what Emil was talking about, reinitiate, unearth those cinema cultures that are there, long there. Thank you, Babalwa Bartman, Jenna Cato Bass, Emil Shivji, and Hadar Ideas Ahmed. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.